The wind on the prairie had a voice, a mournful cry that scraped against the weathered planks of the tiny cabin where My Lin and her two sons, Jin and Bo, made their home. It was a voice of hardship, a constant reminder of the unforgiving land that had taken her husband and left her with nothing but his unshakable belief in a better tomorrow. That belief was a flickering candle in the vast darkness of her reality. Every line on her face, etched by sun and sorrow, told a story of resilience. Her hands, though calloused from tilling the stubborn soil, moved with a gentle grace as she divided their meager meal of watery stew into 3 small bowls. Jin, her older son at 10, had eyes that held the solemn weight of a man twice his age, while 8-year-old Bo still possessed a spark of childhood wonder, a spark My Lin fought to protect with every fiber of her being. The cabin itself was a testament to their struggle. The walls were thin, the floorboards groaned, and the single window was a patchwork of salvaged glass that distorted the desolate landscape into a hazy dream. One evening, as the sky turned a bruised purple, the wind's cry became a roar. A dust storm, a monstrous, rolling cloud of earth, descended upon them, swallowing the sun and plunging their world into a terrifying twilight. As the cabin shuddered under the assault, a frantic, desperate banging echoed from their door. My Lin froze, her heart seizing with fear. Who could be out in this maelstrom? Jin moved to stand protectively in front of his mother, his small fists clenched. With a deep breath, My Lin opened the door just a crack, and the body of a man collapsed inward, a heap of fine but torn and blooded fabric against their rough floor. He was a stranger, his face pale beneath a layer of grime, a dark stain spreading across his chest. He was dying at her doorstep, a mystery delivered by the storm. What secret was this person carrying that would change everything for this forgotten family? We are about to find out, but before we continue with their incredible story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to keep telling stories that inspire and warm the heart. Now, let's see what happened next. My Lin's mind raced with 1,000 fears. In this harsh land, a stranger could mean danger, another mouth to feed, or a harbinger of troubles they could not afford. Yet, looking down at the unconscious man, she saw not a threat, but a human being on the precipice of death. Her core principles, forged in a distant land and tempered by faith, would not allow her to turn him away. "Jin, help me," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Together, they dragged the heavy man further inside and barred the door against the howling wind. She lit another lantern, its golden glow casting long shadows across the room. As she carefully began to clean the man's wounds, she saw the stark contrast between his world and hers. His clothes, though ruined, were of a rich, dark wool she had only ever seen in catalogues. The leather of his boots was supple and clearly expensive. A heavy silver ring on his finger, unadorned but elegant, spoke of a life of means. He was no common drifter. He was someone of substance, and he was gravely wounded. With Bo bringing her clean water and Jin tearing their spare linen into bandages, My Lin worked tirelessly. She used the last of her precious medicinal herbs to make a poultice for the gash on his side, her touch gentle and sure. As she tended to him, she prayed. She prayed for his life, and she prayed that her act of compassion would not bring ruin upon her children. For hours, he drifted in and out of consciousness, his breath shallow and ragged. In his delirium, he murmured a name, Anna, a whisper of such profound loss that it pierced My Lin's heart. She saw in his tormented face a grief that mirrored her own, a universal language of sorrow that transcended their different worlds. The storm raged outside, but inside the small, quiet cabin, a fragile life was being mended by the hands of a woman who had almost nothing to give but her unwavering kindness. The days that followed unfolded with a slow, watchful rhythm. The stranger, whom they had no name for, remained weak, tethered to the world by a thread that My Lin's constant care kept from snapping. She shared their food with him, thinning their already thin stew even further, a sacrifice the boys accepted without a word of complaint. They named him Arthur, a strong, gentle name they felt suited the quiet dignity he possessed even in his vulnerable state. Arthur Vance, as he would later be known, spent most of his time observing. From the cot where he lay, his gaze followed My Lin as she moved about the cabin, her motions economical and filled with purpose. He watched her mend the boys' clothes with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, her face a mask of concentration. He saw her teaching Jin his letters from a worn family Bible, the only book they owned, her finger tracing the words with a reverence that spoke of a deep well of faith. He saw the way she would brush a stray lock of hair from Beau's forehead, a small gesture of immense love. He saw not poverty, but richness, not despair, but a quiet, powerful hope. He began to form a silent bond with the children. Jin, serious and protective, would sit near his cot, silently reading, as if standing guard. Beau, more curious, would show Arthur his greatest treasure, a small, crudely carved wooden sparrow, its wings worn smooth from constant handling. "My father made it for me," Beau whispered one afternoon, holding it out for Arthur to see. Arthur reached out a trembling hand and took the small bird. He turned it over and over, a wave of profound sadness and memory washing over his features. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He saw a ghost of another boy, another carved toy, in another life. In the quiet humility of this family, in their unspoken sacrifices for one another, the ice around his own broken heart began to show the first signs of a thaw. One blistering afternoon, a shadow fell across their doorway, blocking the sun. A large, imposing man stood there, his fine suit and polished boots a jarring intrusion into their world of patched-over poverty. His name was Bartholomew Thorne, and he owned most of the land in the county, or at least, he intended to. His eyes, small and hard like pebbles, scanned the meager interior of the cabin with undisguised contempt. "My Lin," he boomed, his voice oozing a false pleasantry that did not reach his eyes. "I trust you've reconsidered my generous offer for this property." My Lin stood tall, her small frame radiating a strength that defied her circumstances. "This is my home, Mr. Thorne." "It is not for sale." Thorne's smile tightened into a sneer. "Everything is for sale, my dear woman. The railroad is coming through, and I am consolidating my holdings. This pathetic plot of land is a thorn in my side. I'm offering you $50. Take it, or my men will remove you and your offspring." By the end of the month the threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Jin instinctively moved closer to his mother, his young face a mixture of fear and defiance. From his cot in the corner, hidden by the shadows, Arthur watched the entire exchange. He was still too weak to stand, but a fire had been lit in his weary eyes. He saw in Thorne the embodiment of the soulless greed that had corrupted so much of the world he knew. He saw a bully preying on the vulnerable, a vulture circling a family that had shown him nothing but pure, unadulterated kindness. As Thorne turned to leave, spitting on the ground just outside their door as a final act of disrespect, Arthur's hand clenched the rough blanket beside him. The fight was no longer just about his own survival. He now had a reason to get stronger, a reason to push back against the darkness. He would not let this man destroy the fragile sanctuary that had saved his life. As Arthur's physical strength returned, so did his voice. The conversations were simple at first, short exchanges about the weather or the mending of the roof. But one evening, as the boys slept soundly and the only light came from the soft glow of the hearth, a deeper connection was forged. My Lin was carefully polishing the small, silver locket she always wore, a precious keepsake from her husband. Noticing his gaze, she spoke softly. "He believed in this land. He said it would provide for us." Arthur's expression softened with an empathy that needed no words. He finally decided to share a piece of his own fractured past. "I had a wife," he began, his voice raspy with emotion. "Her name was Anna." "And a son?" "David." He spoke of a life in a bustling eastern city, a life of comfort and privilege that had been shattered by a sudden fever that took them both within a week. "I thought if I came west, I could outrun the memories," he confessed, his eyes fixated on the dancing flames. "But grief has a long shadow." My Lin listened, her heart aching for his loss. She understood the shape of that shadow all too well. Later that week, seeing Beau carefully tracing the wings of his wooden sparrow, Arthur asked for a small block of wood and a whittling knife. His hands, though still not fully steady, moved with a practiced, loving familiarity. He spent hours carving, the shavings falling like snow onto the floor. When he was finished, he presented Beau with a newly carved eagle, its wings outstretched as if in flight, its details far more intricate than the simple sparrow. "My David loved eagles," Arthur said softly. He believed they carried prayers to heaven. Bo gasped in wonder, his eyes wide. In that moment, Arthur was no longer just a stranger they had saved. He was a kindred spirit, a man who understood their world of love, loss, and cherished memories. He was building a bridge of trust, one small, kind act at a time, connecting his broken past to their uncertain future. With his returning vigor, Arthur began to repay their kindness in the only way he could. He became a whirlwind of quiet, determined activity. He saw the way the wind seeped through the cracks in the walls and spent days mixing mud and straw to chink the gaps, his movements methodical and sure. He climbed onto the roof and replaced the rotten shingles, his silhouette a dark, promising shape against the vast sky. The rhythmic sound of his hammer became the new heartbeat of their homestead, a sound of construction, of hope being built board by board. He noticed the family's small patch of land was barely yielding enough to survive. One morning, he announced he was walking to the nearby settlement for supplies. My Lin protested, knowing they had no money, but he insisted, a gentle but firm resolve in his eyes. He returned that evening, his arms laden with sacks of beans, flour, and, most importantly, seeds for a proper garden. He also carried new leather shoes for the boys and a warm shawl for My Lin. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "How?" she asked simply. "I had a few coins saved," he lied smoothly, omitting the part about the gold sovereign he had sewn into the hem of his trousers for emergencies. Together, they tilled the soil, a shared labor under the hot sun. He showed Jin how to plant the corn in straight, even rows, and he helped Bo water the delicate squash seedlings. As they worked, the land began to transform from a symbol of their struggle into a field of potential. A small, vibrant green patch began to emerge from the dusty brown earth. For the first time in years, My Lin looked out at her home and felt not the crushing weight of survival, but the delicate, blooming flower of a secure future. Hope, once a distant star, was now a tangible thing they were cultivating with their own hands. The sight of the flourishing garden and the repaired cabin did not go unnoticed. Bartholomew Thorne returned, his carriage kicking up a cloud of arrogant dust. This time, his facade of civility was gone, replaced by a raw, undisguised fury. He saw not a struggling family on the brink of collapse, but a homestead showing signs of permanence, of defiance. "I see you've found a farmhand," Thorne sneered, his eyes locking onto Arthur, who stood calmly by the newly built fence. "It won't matter. This land is mine." "You are squatters," My Lin stepped forward. "We have the deed." "My husband filed it legally," Thorne laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "A piece of paper is a fragile thing. Easily lost. Easily burned." His gaze shifted meaningfully towards their small, precious stack of firewood. The threat was clear. Arthur stepped between Thorne and the family, his posture relaxed but his presence formidable. "You will leave them be," Arthur said, his voice low and even, yet carrying an authority that made Thorne pause. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" Thorne spat, sizing Arthur up. "Just a man who believes in decency," Arthur replied. "A concept you wouldn't understand." Enraged by this unexpected resistance, Thorne spurred his horse and galloped away, but his parting shout echoed back to them, "You will regret this." The crisis had escalated. The threat was no longer a distant possibility, it was an imminent danger. That night, under the cover of darkness, one of Thorne's men snuck onto their property and poisoned their well, filling it with filth and oil. The act was a cruel escalation, an attack on their very source of life. Staring into the contaminated water the next morning, My Lin felt a cold dread, but when she looked at Arthur's face, she saw not fear, but the hard, unyielding certainty of a man preparing for battle. The final confrontation came just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and red. Bartholomew Thorne did not come alone. He arrived with 4 hired thugs, rough men with cruel faces and guns holstered at their hips. They dismounted, their intent clear in their menacing approach. "This is your final warning," Thorne declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "Get off my land, or be removed." But this time, the family did not cower. My Lin stood on the porch, her sons behind her, her face a portrait of quiet defiance. And beside her stood Arthur, no longer a wounded stranger but a resolute protector. As the thugs moved forward, Arthur met them. What happened next was a blur of calculated, efficient motion that stunned everyone. He disarmed the first man with a speed that seemed impossible, using the man's own momentum against him. He blocked a punch from a second and delivered a precise, disabling blow. He was not brawling like a common cowboy, he was fighting with a disciplined skill that spoke of military training. He moved with a purpose and economy that left the hired muscle confused and overpowered. Jin, seeing an opportunity, acted with the wisdom his hard life had taught him. He kicked over a barrel of nails, sending them scattering under the feet of the remaining men, causing them to stumble. While Thorn was distracted by the unexpected and effective defense, the town sheriff, drawn by a message Arthur had sent with a passing farmer earlier that day, rode up with 2 deputies. He had long been suspicious of Thorn's methods but lacked concrete proof. Now, witnessing the blatant assault, he had all the evidence he needed. "Thorn," the sheriff said, his voice like gravel. "You and your men are under arrest for assault and attempted illegal eviction." Thorn's face contorted in disbelief and rage as the deputies clapped him in irons. The physical threat was over, the villain defeated not by brute force alone, but by a combination of courage, intelligence, and a community finally willing to stand for what was right. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, as the dust settled and peace returned to the small homestead, the final pieces of the mystery fell into place. The sheriff, before taking Thorn away, had looked at Arthur with a flicker of recognition. "You're Arthur Vance, aren't you? Of the Eastern Vance Corporation. There was a notice out for you. Your partners were worried you'd vanished." The name hung in the air, filled with the weight of immense wealth and power. My Lin and the boys looked at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. Later that evening, Arthur sat with them and told them the whole truth. He was indeed that Arthur Vance, a man who had built an empire of railroads and industry but had lost his soul in the process after the death of his family. He had come west under a false name, not to escape his grief, but to investigate men like Thorn, who were using intimidation and fraud to acquire land for his new rail lines. He had been ambushed by Thorn's men, robbed, shot, and left for dead in the wilderness, crawling his way to their door as his last act of survival. "You saved my life, my Lin," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "But you did more than that. You and your sons, you healed a part of me I thought was dead forever. You reminded me what it means to have a home, to have a family." He then unrolled a set of official-looking documents on the small wooden table. "Before the sheriff left, I had him wire my lawyers. It's all legal. I've not only purchased this plot of land in your name, but I have acquired all of Bartholomew Thorn's holdings in this county. They are now yours." My Lin stared at him, speechless. He then produced a final document. It was his will. "My fortune was a burden," he explained. "It was a monument to a life that no longer had meaning. Now, it has a purpose. I'm leaving everything to you and the boys. To build a future. To ensure you never have to fear a man like Thorn again." A year passed, and the landscape of their lives transformed as dramatically as the seasons on the prairie. The small, weathered cabin was now the heart of a beautiful, thriving homestead. A sturdy new wing had been added, with glass windows that let in the warm, unfiltered sunlight. A strong, handsome barn stood nearby, and the fields, once barren, were now lush with rows of corn and vegetables, a testament to their hard work and newfound prosperity. The once poisoned well now drew clean, sweet water, a symbol of their renewed life. Inside the home, the air was filled not with the scent of worry, but with the aroma of freshly baked bread and the sound of laughter. Jin and Bo, dressed in clean, sturdy clothes, were no longer haunted by the spectre of hunger. They spent their days learning at the new schoolhouse in town, a school built and funded by the Vance fortune, open to all the children of the settlement. Their eyes, once old with hardship, now shone with the bright, boundless promise of youth. My Lin was the mistress of this new world, yet her gentle spirit and quiet strength remained unchanged. The lines of sorrow on her face had softened, replaced by a serene and joyful peace. She still wore the small silver locket, a memory of the love that had brought her here, but now it was accompanied by the simple silver ring Arthur had placed on her finger. He had not returned to the east. He had found his home here, in the wide open spaces of the West, with the family that had shown him the way back to himself. He was no longer a grieving industrialist or a mysterious stranger, but a husband and a father, his days filled with the simple, profound purpose of building a life with those he loved. Together, they had weathered the storm, and in the quiet peace of their shared future, they had found their happily ever after, a living testament to the idea that the greatest fortunes are not made of gold, but are built from kindness, courage, and the enduring power of a second chance.